This will be wisdom literature, part 1. So we're going to get into some of these wisdom texts like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job. There are also some texts that aren't in the Protestant Bible. The Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach, which is also called Ecclesiasticus. And wisdom literature is supposed to kind of tell you how life works. It's kind of like parental admonition. You know, if my dad always told me growing up, you can do anything you want as long as you are willing to accept the consequences of your actions. And that's kind of like the wisdom literature. There's a way to live and there's a way not to live. So, I mean, if we think about a few examples, let's say that I have a friend and he's cheating on his wife and he has no intention of stopping. Now, he thinks his marriage won't suffer as long as his wife doesn't know. Is he right? No, of course he's not. But why not? You know, that's the question. What if he doesn't get caught? And I think Christians would say, because he's living in a way that dishonors his wife and dishonors God. And if you live that way for long enough, you're probably going to suffer because of it. Think about another scenario. A single mother raises a daughter, shows her love, provides for her, and then once her daughter's grown up and her mother becomes elderly and in need of assistance, the daughter refuses to help her mother even though she has the means to do so. Now, we would say that that's wrong. But why is it wrong? We think it's wrong because we think that the universe has a moral structure to it, that the world isn't a morally neutral place, that God has designed the world with a certain ethical vision in mind. And if we only think of ourselves, we're not living into that ethical vision. Here's another scenario. A man makes a lot of money in his lifetime, and he spends all of it on himself. He doesn't marry because he's afraid that his wife will take his money, and he doesn't give any of it away to other people. He lives in a mansion, he drives an expensive car, and he dies filthy rich. Now, would we say he spent his money well? No, we wouldn't. But why not? Because we think that there's a moral and an immoral way to use money. And our scripture teaches us a lot, actually, about the proper use of money. I mean, this kind of reminds me of the parable of the rich fool who built up, more barns to store his stuff, and then that very night he died. His life was taken from him. Now, these are just really practical questions, these three scenarios that I've posed. And they're not that unrealistic, really. We might even be able to think of people we've known who kind of fit these scenarios. These are the kinds of practical questions that are addressed in the Jewish wisdom literature. Okay, this is not kind of high-flying speculative theology. It's experiential wisdom that helps you to govern your day-to-day living. For ancient Jews, wisdom, it's kind of like with us, wisdom is passed down from generation to generation. Growing up, my parents made an effort to form me as a person. And I think one of the problems as the family unit breaks down is that the passing down of wisdom from one generation to the next also breaks down. Something I want to do is I want to try to pass some things down to my kids. And that's kind of how wisdom was passed down in Jewish culture. So a lot of what we would read in, say, the book of Proverbs is probably wisdom that was passed down from generation to generation, family member to family member through the years. And that's why a lot of, say, Proverbs sounds like paternal or maternal advice given from a parent to a child. Children learn from their parents, and they learn from their parents, and so on. Okay. Now, in this literature, what's learned here isn't some kind of abstract idea of right and wrong, and it's not a list of commands dictating what you should or shouldn't do. There's a tradition of Jewish wisdom that we're getting here that tells you how to live in the best way you can in the universe that God created. Okay, so it's not just any wisdom that's being passed down in the wisdom literature. It's the wisdom of a particular people, the people of Israel, who worshiped a particular God, Yahweh. Now, there are all kinds of things that pass for wisdom in our culture. You know, we always talk about conventional wisdom, for example. But conventional wisdom on a given topic could be completely wrong. Just because a lot of people think a particular thing doesn't mean that that particular thing is right. And what's unique about Jewish wisdom is that it's focused on the will of the God of Israel and the way in which that God has created the universe. The universe, in other words, is not a morally neutral place. God has set it up in a certain way. Different cultures may have other ideas about what conventional wisdom actually is, but the Jewish wisdom literature says if you really want to know what wisdom is, you have to know who God is, and you have to listen to God's commands and obey them. Okay. Any questions about any of this? So if we turn to the book of Proverbs, you know, if you just skim through Proverbs, you'll see that it's a collection of kind of pithy sayings about right and wrong. You know, everything in Proverbs you could probably tweet if you have Twitter, you know, because they're all short, or most of them are short and kind of punchy. Like, look at Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Okay, if you fear the Lord, you naturally hate evil. Let's find another one here. A child, I'm in 10:5. Let's go back to 10:2. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. I mean, I think most of us would agree with that if we make our money in a way that is evil, we might have more money, but do we really profit from it? Is our life really better for it? Probably not. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but He thwarts the craving of the wicked. Now here's one that elicits the kind of warning that Fee and Stewart have in their book about absolutizing the theology of the Proverbs. Okay. We could turn this into a theological proposition. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry. Okay. But we know that at times the righteous do go hungry. And so what this isn't saying that it's not giving you an absolute rule that's going to govern every aspect of life in all circumstances. Okay? What it's talking about are the general tendencies of things that happen within God's world. And the vision of God in Proverbs is a God who cares about us and a God who wants to bless us. And if we walk in God's ways, it's just easier for God to bless us. Okay. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Okay. That's kind of basic common sense. I mean, Benjamin Franklin could have written that, for crying out loud. Is it always true? No. But it sort of expresses a commonplace rule of life. The wise of heart will heed commandments. I'm in 10:8. But a babbling fool will come to ruin. And so, as a general tendency, we might say that's true, but it's not true all the time. We can all think of babbling fools who at least have not yet come to ruin. I won't mention the election. Okay, so Proverbs is focused on teaching. It's the collected wisdom of a people. You know, that there are better and worse ways to live in the world. And that's not how I think a lot of people think about the world today, because we personalize everything so much. We might say, well, that's right for you, but it's not right for me. And you may not like this about me, but it's right for me, even if it's not right for you. Okay? And what Proverbs says is, that's really not a very good way to think about things. Because God didn't make the world a morally neutral place. God cares about how we live. And there are ways to live that benefit us and ways to live that hurt us. So to take an extreme example, if I exercise for an hour every day and I watch my diet and count calories, I mean, yeah, I could fall down dead of a heart attack tomorrow, but chances are I'm going to be healthier than if I didn't do that. Okay. On the other hand, if I smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day, I might live to be 90 years old. But chances are I won't, because smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day is bad for me. So those are just kind of practical matters of wisdom. And what Proverbs wants to say is that these practical matters of wisdom have to do with the way in which God created the world. So living consistently with the way in which God created the world will benefit you, and you will generally have a better life than if not. Now, in Proverbs, we get, and in other wisdom literature as well, okay, we get wisdom as kind of a personified being. And let me find this here. So, for example, if we look at 3:19, wisdom is kind of like God's co-creator. She was there with God in the beginning of all things. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, 3:19. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge he broke open the deeps. You see, the Lord by wisdom. Now, this is going to get stronger in, this claim is going to be made stronger in another text we're going to look at. But back up to 120 for a minute. Wisdom cries out in the streets. In the squares she raises her voice. At the busiest corner she cries out. At the entrance of the city gate she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will you scoffers delight in their scoffing? And fools hate knowledge. Give heed to my reproof. I will pour out my thoughts to you. See, wisdom is calling out to men and women, saying there's a right, there are better and worse ways to live. And the better and worse ways to live affect your quality of life. Now, Proverbs isn't just concerned with, so we have, wisdom as a concept. And wisdom was there with God. When God set up the world, it wasn't just a material God just didn't create dirt and plants and air and water and things like this. God also brought wisdom. Well, wisdom is there with God. And the work of wisdom is woven into the fabric of the world. So the world doesn't have just a material structure. The world has an ethical structure as well. Now, wisdom literature isn't just concerned with wise people and doing wise things. It's also concerned with what Proverbs calls the fool and doing foolish things. And Proverbs actually spends a lot of time talking about fools. Let me see here. Look at 12:1. And chapter 12 has a number of kind of contrasts in it between wise and foolish behavior. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. But those who hate to be rebuked are stupid. Okay, so you have to be able to receive criticism, it's saying. Look at 12:11. Those who till their land will have plenty of food, but those who follow worthless pursuits have no sense. The evil are ensnared by the transgression of their lips, but the righteous escape from trouble. Verse 16, fools show their anger at once, but the prudent ignore an insult. 18, rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Verse 23, one who is clever conceals knowledge, but the mind of a fool broadcasts folly. Okay, we also get sayings about, for example, the proud and the humble. So look at 15:25. The Lord tears down the house of the proud, but maintains the widow's boundaries. 15:33, the fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom, and humility goes before honor. 16:5, all those who are arrogant are an abomination to the Lord. Be assured they will not go unpunished. Um, 16:18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It is better to be of a lowly spirit among the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. So Proverbs emphasizes things like living rightly, avoiding evil. Don't be too proud. Don't be arrogant. Don't puff yourself up or toot your own horn. Treat the poor kindly. Follow God's commandments. Avoid adultery. These kinds of admonitions are just kind of basic advice rooted in the way in which God has structured the world. If we want to turn, do any of you have a Bible with an apocrypha in it? So I'll just another wisdom text is the Wisdom of Solomon. And if we were Catholic, this would be in our Bible. Along with Sirach. And the Wisdom of Solomon, if we go back to chapter 7, the Wisdom of Solomon talks a lot about the nature of wisdom. Wisdom, this personified woman, this co-creator with God at the beginning of all things. Let me see here. For example, if we look at chapter 7, verse 20, starting with the end of verse 22, it says, "There is in her a spirit that is intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, mobile, clear, unpolluted, distinct, invulnerable, loving the good, keen, irresistible, beneficent, humane, steadfast, sure, free from anxiety, all-powerful, overseeing all, and penetrating through all spirits that are intelligent, pure, and altogether subtle." And move into verse 25. "For she is a breath of the power of God, and a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty. For she is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God." Anyone know where this kind of language shows up in the New Testament? Well, let's turn to Hebrews 1. We've already looked earlier in the course at how John utilizes wisdom literature in the prologue, verses 1 through 18. But if we look at Hebrews 1, think about what I just read, and now look at the description of the Son, S-O-N, here in the prologue to Hebrews. "In these last days, God has appointed to us," I'm in verse 2, "a Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom He also created the worlds." Now that's a characteristic of wisdom, that God created the worlds through wisdom. "He is the reflection of God's glory in the exact imprint of God's very being, and He sustains all things by His powerful word." Now, let's read what I just read again in 7:25, Wisdom of Solomon. "She is a breath of the power of God and a pure emanation of the glory of Almighty." Verse 26, "She is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of goodness." You see, in both of these, God, on the one hand, wisdom, and on the other hand, Jesus, are reflections of the goodness of God. Flawless reflections of the goodness of God. And so when the early Christians were thinking about who Jesus was and His significance, they were surely drawing on wisdom literature to provide some theological resources for this. I have 1427 written down for some reason. Let me see what that is. Oh, okay. I don't need to look at that. Now, another such text is Sirach. Sirach is another kind of standard wisdom text, and again, we get a personified wisdom. For example, 4:11. "Wisdom teaches her children and gives help to those who seek her." And then we get sort of things like we get in Proverbs, kind of practical advice. "Do not rely on your wealth or say, 'I have enough.' Do not follow your inclination and strength in pursuing the desires of your heart. Do not say, 'Who can have power over me?' For the Lord will surely punish you. Do not say, 'I sinned, yet what has happened to me?' For the Lord is slow to anger. Do not be so confident of forgiveness that you add sin to sin." Okay, so, I think that you can get a pretty clear sense of what is happening within this wisdom literature. Now, Fee and Stewart also group the Song of Solomon into wisdom literature, which I thought was interesting. But they see this as an expression of the kind of romantic love that God intended between a man and a woman. Now, the church has allegorized, in most cases, the Song of Solomon. In other words, what is the Song of Solomon? It's a sensual love poem. I mean, on its face, that's what it is. But at times the church has been less comfortable having that within the canon of Scripture. I mean, the Song of Solomon doesn't really talk about God. It doesn't give us any theological content. We don't get commandments. We don't get, proverbs. It's a romantic, sensual love poem. And nevertheless, what Fee and Stewart want to say is, this is wisdom literature. Because it shows us something about the way in which God created relationships between men and women. And God, so it tells us about, again, the way in which God wants the world to work. And that's why they understand it as wisdom literature. So keep in mind, wisdom is practical. It's not particularly theological. It's not really high-flying. It's basically everyday advice for what the best way to live is. Where wisdom does get theological is in the personification of woman wisdom as this master worker alongside God at the beginning of creation, through whom God brought all things into being. And this certainly played into the way in which the early church began to think about Jesus in his coexistence with the Father as the Son of God. Okay?